Now that we mentioned this meter and transformer, it'd be nice to show some of that on our plan view. So let's create a site plan that would have all of the site work on it rather than our building plan. So let's go back and take a look at our floor plan. So I need to create a site plan that is not cropped like this. So could I just copy this power plan? Well, I could, but if you recall, we have a grade level, and I want my site plan to be at that grade level. Now, even though the site may undulate and stuff, I think the actual base level of a site really should be at that grade. So we're going to create a new plan view based upon the grade level. So let's go to View, Plan View, and hit Floor Plan. Now this is showing me, because it says do not duplicate existing views, it's only showing me the views that I have not yet created a floor plan for. If I wanted to use level 1, again, I can uncheck this and use level 1, but I just want to use the grade level. So let's say grade level, yes, create one for that. And now it created a whole new plan called grade. And by default, this template is set up to apply a view template to it called electrical plan. Well, I don't need that view template because I'm just going to create a site plan. I don't have a view template for a site plan, so I'm just going to modify this on my own. There's only one site plan, so I don't even need a template. So we're back to the no template land. One thing I want to make note of, though, for the site plan is this north thing. I talked about early on that we have two different norths. We have a project north, which aligns the building in vertical horizontal for ease of drafting. But for a site plan, I actually want a true north. So I'm going to change this to true north. And that automatically tilts the building to make true north. Now, this big green box is probably a scope box in the architectural plan for the site. And I could do that. I could create a scope box. Again, I only have one site plan, so I don't need to get as picky about scope boxes as I do on the building plan. So I'm just going to crop this manually. The way I do that, turn on the crop view and turn on the crop region. Now I can crop this down. So let's go ahead and crop this down to roughly that scope box. I can't use the scope boxes in the architectural. I would have to create my own if I wanted one. But I can use it to help me pull in the crop. Something like that. Now, what scale do I want my site plan? Well, I would typically base it upon the same scale that either my architect did, or even if you have a civil engineer doing site work on this job, kind of mimic what they've done. And they are typically not in 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch. They're more of a 1/10 of an inch, 20th of an inch kind of scale. So I'm going to set this one up for a 1/10 of an inch scale, which is similar to 1/8 inch. And then I also want to make sure I name this floor plan, hit F2 as a site plan. So I'm going to call this 10 so it appears above my floor plan. And I'm just going to call it site plan. And I'm going to call this electrical, not just power, because I use a site plan to show both power and lighting on the site. So I'm just calling that electrical to be generic. Now, a few more things on this site plan. I typically don't need to show any grids because I'm not going to refer to anything inside the building. So let me turn grids off. And I can just do that for both my model and the linked model by just turning them off here. If I just go to annotation and turn off the grids, it turns them off in both because my Revit link is still by host view. So if I don't change that to custom, then I can control it with my model, which is the host. You also may think, well, I don't really want to see all of these receptacles inside the building. How can I turn those off? Well, I could turn off the electrical fixtures, and in this case, that may work. But let's say I had a receptacle that I want to put out here, on my driveway somewhere. I'd want to see that receptacle out here, but I don't want to see the ones inside. So we're going to get tricky and use what are called filters. And we'll deal with that later. I'll show you how that works. But for now, we're just going to let these show for now, and we'll deal with that filter later. What I want to show on here, and I want to make sure I have lighting turned on as well, because I'm going to install a pole light out here on my site. But let's get the service going. So I have this panel here. I'm going to put the meter just outside of it. And then I have a transformer that's actually, I found out, that's out here at the street. So what can I do? I want to show that transformer. So let's go down to our families and see what we have. Let's go down to electrical equipment. We have dry type transformers. Well, that's not what they use on the utility. They use a wet or a liquid filled. So here's a wet transformer. And there's different sizes. Now, these are pretty much commercial sizes out of the box, but we can still use them. Let's drag in the smallest transformer we have, a 75. Ours is going to be typically like a 25 or a 50, and it's going to be single phase. But let's get that in here and see what it looks like. It looks like a box. So we're going to put this transformer out here near the street. And we're going to say we found out from the utility that's right there. And it's at 0, it's at grade. Now, if we go to our 3D view of the site, we have the section box view, which doesn't show the whole site. Let's go ahead and just do another generic there, 3D site. And we're going to save that one as 3D site. We can change it if we want to a different look, colors and such. But here's our transformer. And we need to add a meter over here. So let's go to our site plan, and I'm going to get rid of those extras. And we're going to add a meter. Now, we don't have an out-of-the-box meter family. So what I've included in this project template for you is miscellaneous electrical equipment. I also have a miscellaneous electrical fixture. Remember, those are two different categories, so they will be controlled differently and displayed differently. So we want to use the electrical equipment. So I'm going to take this guy, and it's just a box with an electrical connector. Pull it out here. You will see it's just a box. It's a three-dimensional box if you look at the 3D view. See that box? I can shrink that and grow it and turn it and do whatever I want to make it be, let's say, a meter base. Again, it's just a close approximation of something. At least it's something 3D in the model. As you get into custom families, you can make that look exactly like a meter base and put a meter on it and all that. But for now, we're going to use this. And what you can do is if you hit spacebar, it spins around its insertion point, which is right there. So you can take this and put another one in. And then if I get close, as I hit spacebar, it spins parallel and perpendicular to that line. So do that and get this right here on that wall. Get rid of that one. And then I'm going to shrink this down to be dimensions I want. Now, because you see these little grips, these are instance parameters for the size right here. They're not a type parameter. They are an instance parameter. So I can stretch this however I want. And then I can also use these to dial it in. So as a foot wide, I don't need it that tall. Let's go with a foot tall and the depth be 6 inches. So there. And then the height is set up at 0. Let's put that up around 4 feet. See how that looks? There. So that can represent our meter base just fine. And its surface on the outside of the house. Now, why can't I see it in my site plan? You guessed it. It's a view range issue. Let's go to our view range. What do we have? The bottom's at grade. Top is only level 1. So the default for this view is only the level above, which is only level 1. Well, we need to go higher than that. So let's go unlimited on our site plan. Another thing I like on our site plan is I don't need to see the walls. I just want to see the roof. It's as if I'm in an airplane view or satellite view. So let's make the cut plane up above the building, like at 50 feet. So now we see the roof line. That's what we want to see. And then we can point to this and we can call this, because it's a piece of electrical equipment, it has a panel name associated with it. So we can call this meter base. And I could go in and change it to the proper voltage, 240 volt, 2-pole. There's no need for me in this situation to actually connect my panel to it logically. It's going to have the same load on it as my panel. I'm not even using panel loads anyway, so I don't need to. But you could interconnect behind the scenes this panel to the meter and then the meter to the transformer and get that all connected if you want to have that reported right and the loads right. But in this case, I don't need to do that. But I do want the name, so I'm going to put a tag on that, and I want a liter meter base. And get that. If this is not hitting right on the meter base, you can disconnect the end. Now this isn't text. Remember, this is a tag, so it behaves differently than text. By default, it has an attached end. So I can unattach, make a free end. Now I have a grip, and I can do that. I can also change my tag, like text, to have an arrowhead. So let's go arrow filled 15 degree, so it will mimic what I'm doing on my text. And on my site plan, I'd also like to call out the panel, so that when you're looking at the site, you can see the electrical distribution equipment. So let's go P1, get that up here. I'm going to put it in alignment with the meter base, and I'm going to get this shoulder in alignment there. So it shows the panel P1, it shows the meter base, and then I'm going to want to tag this. This has a panel name as well because it's a piece of electrical equipment. We're going to say utility transformer, just as a way as identifying it and tag by category on the plan. Okay, so the last thing I'd like to do on this service is show my line coming from meter base out to this transformer. Now, there's a couple ways we can do this. We can simply draw some drafting lines and indicate that typically PVC conduit feed, or we can actually model in some 3D conduit. Now, residentially, you don't have a lot of opportunity for showing those conduits, but on a site, it makes sense. And it may be handy for coordination with other utilities on this property. The civil engineer could bring your model into theirs and do some coordination with the water lines and the waste lines, etc. Gas line. We don't have gas here, but if they had gas lines. So the way we can accomplish that is to first make sure we have conduit turned on in this plan and make sure it is set up the way we want it to look. We have no view template. Let's go to our visibility and let's make sure we have conduits and conduit fittings enabled. We do. Now, the one thing I like to do with conduits, kind of like the ductwork, I would like the conduit to be two line, so like three-dimensional conduit, show both lines, not just a center line. That depends on the detail level of that view. I could change the entire detail level of the view to fine, but then I see things I don't want to see. For example, I go fine. Now I'm seeing back boxes and things like that. Even though I'm going to turn these off, it's a good practice to just make the main view either fine, either medium or coarse, and then just make the things you want to see detailed be fine. So again, you can change the detail level of individual categories. Right now it says just do it by the view settings, which is the standard out-of-the-box way to do it. But on conduits and fittings, I want them to be fine. So let's go to fine. That way, when I draw these, I'm going to see three-dimensional. So what I have is I'm going to be coming down out of my transformer with my conduit, going horizontally, and then coming up vertically into my meter base is how that would typically be done for an underground conduit. If there was a vault out here, I may come out horizontally out of a vault, but I don't have that situation. So we're just going to come out underneath. Now this transformer is arranged so that the front is at the bottom. This is where the primary and secondary feeds enter the transformer. Typically primary comes in on the left entrance. Secondaries come out the right side, so I'm going to draw it that way. So let's see. Let's go to our Systems tab, and we're going to go to Actual Conduit. If you click on Conduit, or hit CN for the shortcut, now you're into the conduit installation. This lets us pick out which family and type of conduit do we want to use. Now, it jumped into conduit without fittings. Since I'm not doing detailed installation diagrams with fittings and such, I'm going to use this conduit without fittings. It will install elbows, but it won't get fancy with other fittings like connectors and things like that. So we're fine without fittings. And this is using rigid non-metallic conduit, RNC, which would be like a PVC style of Schedule 40. So that's already what I want to use. Now there's other things. You can use EMT, rigid metal conduit like a GRC, Schedule 40 or Schedule 80, rigid non-metallic PVC. And that's with fittings and without. So I'm fine with this one. And then we can specify the justifications, the reference level. I'm going to reference grade, upper end of it, middle and lower end of the conduit itself. So I can pick if I want the top to be 3 feet below grade. And then I can pick the dimension of the conduit in trade size. So first of all, we're going to pick a 2-inch conduit, which is what we showed on our one-line diagram. So we're good there. And I want the top to be down at least 3 feet below. We're going to say we want it 3 feet below. So let's go with 3, enter. That'll put the top of my conduit at 3 feet. Now, we will see if I can even see this conduit that's below the grade. I could start right here. Now, depending on what piece of equipment I'm dealing with, that may be a problem. If I connect on that, I'm good. Now, some pieces of equipment, if you connect right on it, it will try to attach the conduit to a face of that piece of equipment. Let me try it at the panel end and show you an example of what can happen. So if we go to conduit, if I click on this there, what it's doing is it is showing me the face of the bottom, in this case, of the panel, and this is where the conduit's going to hit. I can move where I want that conduit to come up into the bottom of this panel. If I need to get that specific, I can do this, and it will actually attach the conduit to this box. So if I move the box, the conduit goes with it. You may or may not want that. It depends on what level of detail you're going to get to. A lot of contractors that do detailing will want that specific. They will want to show dimensions and all that. For my purposes, as the engineer or designer, I don't need to get that specific, and I don't want that kind of rigid placement. I want to be able to move my conduit around independent of this box. So for my purposes, I'm not going to connect it that way. And in this case, I'm actually just connecting to the meter base, so I don't need to worry about that issue. But if I was going to try to connect to the panel, I would draw my conduit here, and then I would take this and move it under the panel. And that way it doesn't try to connect, and I don't have those constraints. That's just a little note. So let's delete that. We're going to go from the transformer to the meter base. So we have a 2-inch, 3 feet below. I'm going to use this section is my secondary stub out. And I can try to angle it if that works. Maybe I want to give it one little bend, which is fine. And I'll come into my meter, let's say right in the center of it, and it's not going to attach. And sometimes it gets picky about where you can place it. There we go. So that placed a conduit, and it's just a horizontal conduit, and it's got a slight elbow there. Now, it'd be nice if I could gently curve this like PVC. We don't have that option in Revit. I've had a number of people bring that up. They wish they could. I do too. So we just have to approximate the bend. Now let's look at a section of this. So we maybe want to turn this conduit up into our piece of equipment. So let's get a section out here. I like to do a section that is parallel with my conduit. So let's do this and make sure our depth is far enough. Let's see what we have. Now we need to drop down, and we need to see conduit. Now what's that? Why is a conduit floating up in the air? Well, because I messed up. When I put the elevation, I said 3 feet. Well, that's a positive 3 feet, so it put it above the grade. I need to be a negative 3 feet. So this is good. We're checking. Let's do a -3. There we go. Now, did it change the whole thing? We'll find out. Move this up here. And what I do notice is that now I don't even see that conduit. Why? View range. Check the view range. The bottom is grade and I can't see below grade. So I want to extend this down below the grade. Now I can just say minus 10 feet, or I can just say unlimited. There. Now I can see unlimited, and it'll be a little bit different line type because it's in that region called the view depth. So this view depth gets a different look to it. Let's go back to the section. How did we do? So yes, it took the whole thing and put it underground. Now my view depth doesn't encompass this meter, so I want to extend that further. There we go. Now I can see my meter and my panel. Well, here's my meter box. I want to get this conduit. Now I'm only seeing one line for this conduit, so this view, this section view, has independent controls for the detail level. So I want to make it a detail level called fine. There we go. And I can even make it colored if I want. And this is just for design purposes, but that might look better. Now to curve this up, click on the conduit, and then you can see there's the connector. If I right-click right on the connector, now I could just drag this around, but I can't drag it up. It tries to tilt it. So I need to right-click on the connector and say, draw conduit. If you don't get the draw conduit, that means you didn't click on the connector. See this? There's no draw conduit. So you got to connect right on, which is actually the end of it, not the connector. Draw conduit. Now it will let me continue conduit in any direction I want. I'm going to go up and I'm going to get close to this box. Sometimes if you connect it to the box, you'll get that connection and it shows you the face of the device. I don't want to do so. I'm just going to get close. In fact, I don't want to connect to that panel. Now I'm going to take it and drag it and get close. And because of the thick lines, it's hard to see it. If I want this to exactly touch it without being connected, this is where I will use my align. There. And graphically, it looks kind of weird. But that has my conduit up. And let's go look at the other end. I want to get this conduit bent up. So right on the end of it, right click, draw conduit, get it close. And now I can take it and just drag it. I want it stubbed up above the bottom of the transformer. So there's that. And that's, again, getting picky on how that's drawn. But for coordination, that might be handy. And if you look in the 3D view, you can see that we can change the 3D view also to fine. And then we start seeing our conduit. There, that's a good representation of the site conduit coming in. And then on my site plan, I may just label this the service lateral, and I may just refer it back to the one-line diagram. I don't like to size things in two places. So I'll say UG service lateral C one-line diagram. That's just my preference. And that will refer them back to there. And let's use the aerial loop and install the leader. And there's our loop for that. And things are identified. Now I want to get this light fixture out on my site. What do we have for a light fixture on the site? Let's go down, and we have a lot of these open, so we can start closing some of these. What I brought in is a street light, an antique style. Now this happens to be an out-of-the-box light that is a little shorter, so more of a residential style post, rather than some big 40-foot street light. And again, these are old, so they're set up for halogens or high-pressure sodiums. So we're not going to worry about that. Let's just bring in a 120-volt version. And where's this going to go? It's not hosted. It also doesn't have a height. So it's just going to get attached to grade level. So I'm going to put this out here a little ways away so we don't run into it with our vehicle. There. What does that look like? There, that works. May not be as decorative as we want, but again, we're just trying to show a symbol. And it attached it right to the grade level. I can't even I can raise or lower this. I think I'm just moving it around. Yeah, I'm just moving it around. I'm not raising it or lowering it. So you're stuck with what you get on the height, but that will work. And we're going to connect it at 120 volt. Let's make sure it's at 120. It is. And we want to give this a name. And for site, I like to give them an S number. So let's call this S1. Back here, and we're going to call this a tag. And we have our circuit tag we used last. We want to use our actual type tag. So let's do the circuit tag and then change it. And I don't need a leader, so click off leader. Do that, and then change this to a standard fixture tag to get the S1. Now, how do I want that controlled? Maybe I want it to come on and off with my lights here. So I can actually wire it up from here, tab over that, click it, edit circuit, and then select my site light, say OK. And then I can put a circuit tag on it. There we go. Now we have our site lighting. Now to deal with this filtering issue. All right, hang in here with me. Filters are a little advanced, but they're very important, I feel, to learn even for a beginner. So once you learn these, you'll be glad you did. So the basic idea is the visibility is controlled by the categories. As we saw, we could turn those on and off. However, we have some things within the category that we want to stay on and some to go off. So how do we subcategorize things? Well, what we do is we set up a filter to look for some kind of identifier in, for example, in this case, for the site pieces that says leave that on, but turn things that don't say site off. How can we flag stuff for site? Well, one easy way to do that is with an instance parameter in each of these things that I do want to show up on the site. Now, I don't want to do it the opposite where I flag everything inside the building. There's too many things inside. But on the site, you typically only have a few things. So it's easier to flag those. Now, first of all, equipment. I always want equipment showing on the site and the floor plan. So I don't need to flag those. I'll just leave those on. But I don't want all the light fixtures showing up, and I don't want all of the devices showing up. So I need to flag this light fixture with something that says this is a site. Over here, in the instance parameter of this light fixture are things called image, comments, mark. These are instance parameters that we can use. I use the comments. So on the comments, it's just text. I can just say the word site. It's just a comment. And it's an instance. So it's only on this one light. What I can do is set up a filter that looks at that comment and says, if it says site, leave it on. Leave it visible. If it doesn't say site, turn it off. That's what we're going to do. So let's go over to, we don't have a view template, so we're just going to get into the regular visibility. One of the categories in here is called filters. So click on filters. There are no filters now. So the way these work is we set up a filter to filter out certain pieces. We can add a filter to this view. And here's some filters that are already made. This comes out of the box, and we're not going to use any of these. We're going to create our own filter, and we're going to call it not site. We want this filter to turn things off. We can't turn things on with the filter. It's already on. We have to turn them off. So I'm going to create edit new, a new filter, and here's the name. I'm going to call it a new filter. I'm going to call it not site. Now I'm going to define a rule. Which categories do I want to control with this filter? Well, I want to control anything that might be on the site electrically, which could be light fixtures, lighting devices. It could be electrical fixtures. Now, I don't worry about equipment because I want the equipment to show. So those three things I'm going to control. And then over here, here's the rules. You can have and rules or rules. You'll use some Boolean logic here. We're only going to have one rule, so we don't need and or. So all selected, that means all of the categories that I've selected. And what am I going to check? Which parameter of these lighting devices and fixtures will I check? I'm going to be looking at that comments right there. So all selected comments, I'm checking the comments, and what happens with the comments? Here's my conditional statement. Equals, does not equal, greater than, it's like I say, it's like a Boolean logic. I'm going to say if it does not contain the word site in comments, it's going to get filtered out. Say, okay. Where is it? Well, I need to add that filter to this view now. So add my not site, okay, to this view. You can enable or disable the filter easily here if you want to test it. What's the visibility? If it's not site, right now it's going to be visible. Well, I want the not site to be off, not visible. I'm overriding the natural view that lets those categories show up. Everything disappeared. Well, except this one thing. What's that? Well, that happens to be our water heater. I can turn that off with my category by turning off plumbing equipment there. That's easy to turn off without a filter. So now my equipment shows up, my conduit shows up, and now this light shows up. Nothing else shows up because I filtered it off. They don't say the word site. If I had interior conduits that I didn't want to show up, well, then I would need to add conduit category to my filter and make sure that this conduit had the word site in its comments. See how that works? So in this case, anything that's lighting or electrical devices or switches needs to have the word site in it to show up on my site. But that's an easy way. Once you understand how that works, it's an easy way to subdivide your categories to turn them on and off in views. And you can use this in other views. I use this for enlarged views. If I'm going to enlarge the kitchen, for example, I don't want the devices to show up in my overall plan, only in the enlarged, I can use filters to turn that stuff on and off and subdivide my categories.